Anybody ever watch that show, The Flash? First 3 seasons, fantastic. Fantastic. After that, what up, people? So, here I am, decided, The Flash 9th season is coming out, and I had stopped watching it around the 4th season. So I call myself, I'm like, I'm kind of getting back into it. I'm like, I want to see the next next 4 seasons before the 9th season comes out. So I'm caught up and I can say goodbye to some great characters. Boy, that was tough. Now I remember why I stopped watching it in the first place. Now, I will say this. What makes me qualified? Well, I've said this before. I've been reading comic books before I could read. My brother used to read me comic books when we were going to bed at night. And so, Marvel, DC, all that stuff. My nickname is Flash. It's a long story, and I really don't want to go into it. But so much so that the Flash is actually the only real superhero character that my son really likes. Because he's not really into the whole superhero thing, period. But he loves the Flash because when he was a kid, I gave him this little plush Flash that somebody gave to me. And he grew up with that thing, and he slept with that thing. He still has it. He's 23 years old, and he still has his little plush Flash doll. If I can find a picture of it, I will include it here. And in so much so, when he was 18, his first tattoo is the Flash symbol on his arms. I'll show you a picture of that, too. I have my own makeshift lightning bolt, both done by my friend Tony. So I think I'm qualified on the Flash. The funny thing is, but if you ask me, is the Flash one of my favorite characters? No. But that's a different thing. Anyway, so as I said before, the first 3 seasons of Flash, were some of my favorite shows at the time on TV. That's all I watched was Flash and Doctor Who. That was it. Nothing else. Then, it got kind of boring. Just kind of, I got tired of it. It was like I got tired of evil speedsters, but then when they got away from the evil speedsters, they didn't have good villains. And then some of the villains got more interesting, but then the stories were just bad. And then I started watching the next 4 seasons, and I was just like, it gets worse and worse and worse. The only time I'll say that was interesting, where it got back to interesting, was during the Crisis and the Crisis crossovers. And I got to watch a lot of different characters from the different series come together, and even from some classic series. It was great. I mean, it was really entertaining. Then it got back to what was bad. Just to name a few things, and spoilers if you haven't seen the whole series. Cisco losing his powers, and it was clear by Crisis, by the time they started that it was like, well, maybe that wasn't such a good idea, getting rid of his powers. So then they artificially creates his powers.
Mecha vibe. I know he did not just name me. Oh, shoot.
And it's just like, now you're just walking around with things in your hands. It was a god-awful idea, getting rid of his powers and trying to get back with it. And then eventually he leaves altogether, and it's like, you don't miss him because, well, they were doing stupid things with you anyway. And don't get me wrong, Cisco was one of my favorite characters, granted, before he got the Vibe powers. And I wasn't crazy about him being Vibe, but I adjusted to it. It wasn't the worst. But taking the powers away, especially since it was him doing it, like maybe if he just lost his powers, I would have been okay with it. But him choosing, with all the shit that they got going on, and all of a sudden he's like, I don't need to be Vought. Yeah, but you should, by now, all this shit going on, and you're willing to just take away your power. To the point where you're like, oops, that might have been stupid because I still need to save people and I can't do that as me. You were no longer the man in the chair, so you needed to stay having powers. But he did. So that was bad. The whole Killer Frost thing, Caitlin, I mean, she was better just, once again, just being the person in the chair. I didn't need all these extra superpowered characters. But they made her Killer Frost, and I was dealing with that, and it was, one thing when she was coming out, Killer Frost comes out when she needs to, that was great, but then they tried to make it a whole separate entity, and the whole, the twinning thing, and it was just like, it was clear they didn't know what to do with the character. So it just went back and forth, till they had to kill her. Now they tried to bring her back. And horrible. Dr. Wells. Now, I'll admit, as a guilty pleasure, the whole different Wells, was sort of interesting at one point. Then it got stupid. I was always hoping that it would just come back to the original Wells and they'd be done with all those different Wells. Because when they did by the time they hit the Sherlock Wells, it was like way out of control. So would have been happier if they just gave us the original Wells and just been done with that. They even teased that they were doing that, then it never fully developed. Barry's stepmom with the mental powers, didn't like that, although she, I liked her as a character, but I didn't like her with the powers. Just no. Thank God that Dad never got powers. That was my greatest fear. At some point, Dad was going to have super fucking powers too, or make him a Green Lantern or some shit. That was my biggest fear. Because Joe is probably the most underrated character in that show. I mean, he is really the glue that holds them together. Because he's a great actor, and he is all in on all this shit going on around him and dealing with it great, and still comes across as this great father to Barry. It's almost overdone with all the advice he pulls out of his ass. But then, what helps is that when you see him talking to Barry, it makes sense that Barry has such good advice for other people because he grew up that way, And they never really say that enough. And I don't know if that was even intentional, but it's just because, when Barry is done and he can't think of anything else, all of a sudden, here comes Joe with his, fatherly words of wisdom, and it's boom, everything's fine. So, and like I said, the first 3 seasons, all that stuff worked. Then they just went off the rails, could never get back on the rails. And I am actually scared what's going to happen for season 9. Just keeping all these weird characters, Elongated Man was never one of my favorite characters to begin with. He's a cheap-ass version of Plastic Man. And I can understand why you wouldn't use Plastic Man, because the character would be too over the top for Flash. And I think there is a history with Elongated Man and the Flash in the books. But it's just, he should have just been a guest star, and he went on way too long. And then something happened with the actor, because at some point, by the time Elongated Man is gone, there's this big helmet thing on his head of him waving bye-bye to everybody. And I'm like, that's not the actor. Something happened there. Probably him just getting tired of being that retarded character that they used for far too long. But like I said, I'll be there, season 9, ready to go, praying that it's better, and praying that it's a great goodbye for that cast, who at least gave us 3 fantastic seasons and one little in between. So I'll say 4 fantastic seasons, and hopefully they'll give us something that we will appreciate and think about once the series is completely at an end. But that's it. That's my 2 cents. Thanks for watching.